The following presentation is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first speaking with your doctor.
Hello, welcome to Be Well. My name is Danielle Huzevelt, registered dietitian and board certified health coach. And today I am joined by my colleague and my dear friend, Dr. Michael Boroff. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Danielle.
Today is a very, very interesting topic, and I'm so excited to get into it. We're going to be talking about the culture of stress. Super exciting topic.
It is. I think it's one that people are going to really relate to. So glad to be having this conversation.
Yeah. So let's just dive in, shall we? When I say the culture of stress, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think about how in all our efforts to make things simpler for ourselves and make things easier, in reality, what we've done is just increased our stress levels in so many ways. And I think there's so many cultural values and perspectives and narratives that contribute to the amount of stress that we experience and that really take away from our health, both physically and mentally. There's some larger systems that really need to be influenced here so that we can be healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the trade-off is, there are things that have made our lives, quote unquote, easier in some ways, but also then there's consequence, or there's a payment owed for that convenience. So can we talk a little bit more about maybe some of these systems and even like maybe personal values or cultural values? Let's actually take a look at kind of the systems first. So when you say systems that are in place that up our stress level, what do you mean?
Yeah, I think about how we value people and the value we place around work ethic, how important work is, working hard, achievement. Those layers, and I think that goes back. We can go back to the founding of this country and the folks who founded this and their view of work and how important it is, and work is important. Many of us get a lot of value, personal meaning, and value and purpose from our work, but it's kind of been perverted into something that really isn't healthy for us. And I think about things like, we don't use our PTO like that. And you can go online and look how many hours of PTO go unused in this country every year. That's paid time off. That is part of your benefit as an employee. You're supposed to use it. And people feel bad about the fact that, oh, if I take this vacation, I'm letting my team down, or I'm not going to get all the work done that I need to get done.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to take my PTO, but I'm going to send an email out to everybody telling them how often I'll be checking my email while I'm on PTO. It's like, no. Detach. You need to separate from your work. We all need that, and for some reason, I think there are lots of reasons we feel bad about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So there is this idea that a good portion of our value comes from how productive we are. And I mean, I think we can see this sometimes even in just our interpersonal relationships, like, oh, what do you do for work? Or the rally cry of the, I'm so busy right now, right? Like, and that's like it's like a badge of honor in some way to be completely maxed out. So you have that belief system or that value placed maybe disproportionately on how productive you are. And so then, yeah, it leads into some of these actions like not taking your PTO. What are some other ways that infiltrates people's lives?
Showing up to work sick instead
Yeah.
of using sick days. And I certainly have been guilty of that. Yeah, I have therapy patients I need to see. Like, I can't not show up for those. And meanwhile, I'm coughing and can't even, if you're sick, you need to take care of yourself. That needs to be priority one. I also just think about, and a big part of this stress management kind of area we've been working on is mindfulness. And I think about the things that fill us up as people, the things, being, maybe it's being with people we love, maybe it's being in nature, maybe it's being at a concert, whatever. And then we're on our phones, we're checking work emails, we're responding. We can't be present with this thing that actually is really important to us. And so we're not in one place at a time ever.
Ever.
Really fractured in these different places. And that in itself is actually really stressful. It's always I've taught mindfulness classes in the past, and often when people have really busy lives where they feel like they have to multitask to get things done. And when people commit, like, hey, this week I'm going to say no to multitasking, and I'm going to do one thing at a time, and I'm going to let go of this idea that I'm not getting enough done, and I'm just going to do that. The decrease in stress that they report when they do that is amazing. Like, if we just do one thing at a time, that in and of itself decreases our stress. But we don't have a culture that places value in that. It feels like not doing enough.
That's right. That supports that. And I think you talked about going to work sick as being one of the ways that this can infiltrate people's lives. And you talked about it in relation to physical sickness, but also I think it also plays a role in people not feeling like they're allowed to take time when it's a mental health concern, like taking a mental health day or taking time to address a mental health concern also feels like it's like an added layer of taboo against that.
I think that's a really good point. It's, there's something about that people feel like represents weakness or and it just carries so much judgment with it. And that's really hard, I would love for us to do better jobs of taking care of ourselves as people. And I think that's going to take addressing some of these kind of cultural narratives around stress and productivity, as you brought up. Like, we really need to think these things through.
Right. It also feels like it's both a external and an internal issue as well, because I don't think that we can deny that there is a external culture of this, right? There is the expectation of, production, even when you're out on PTO, that you're going to be available, or you're going to be, you're going to be available 24/7 to answer emails. Oftentimes there can be even if it's unspoken, external expectation of that. What do you notice in your practice on how this comes up, this sort of like external versus maybe the expectation is internal of, I'm going to do these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's varied across the people I've worked with during my clinical career. A lot of the folks I work with now, I think both are very present. They're often people who are really high achievers who've gotten a lot of kind of positive feedback about kind of their work, their their productivity. They even get rewarded for being available. Like they get that positive feedback around. That just kind of reinforces that they need to be doing that. And so there's the internal piece, the drive to be successful, the drive to kind of move forward in careers, and sacrificing a lot to do that. This is what I need to do to get to where I want to be in my career. And then there are also kind of systems that reinforce that. Like, nobody has a manager who says, I noticed you responded to my email at 8:30 last night. Why did you do that? Stop. I've never had a manager. I've had some great bosses. I've never had a boss tell me, why are you doing that? And I think about how much better off we'd be as a culture if that was the response, instead of like, hey, stop that. Be with your family. binge a Netflix show, separate, like that. Think about what life would look like if that were the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So you've got these internal beliefs, your internal value system, which might include achievement and success. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like, that's great. But that then, because we are able to be so connected at all times, and because we've got the ability to be reached in no less than like 12 different ways at any given moment, that system then taps into our drive to like want to be productive and want to be successful and want to achieve. And then again, right, this is like, nobody's telling you to not do that. So it just reinforces that internal, but this is what achievement looks like. This is what I've got to do to be productive, to be seen as valuable, to achieve in my career. Yeah, it's really, and actually thinking about it, it's just not in the career setting. Like, that's in, I think about the upcoming holidays and our ability to just overextend ourselves.
Yeah.
At all times.
Yep.
Huh?
I think about how this kind of flows into parenting as well. I need to keep my kids busy all the time. I need to have them in all these activities. If I'm not doing that, it's not enough. I'm, not kind of not being the parent I need to be. It permeates through our culture in so many ways.
It does.
And I really do feel like it's making us sicker. And as a society, it's something that we really need to address. And I think, if people want evidence of that, again, like, I have places where I live where I can go up into the nature and there's no cell phone service. Like, all of a sudden it's not even an option anymore. And I think about how good it feels. Like, at first, maybe it's a little bit anxiety provoking. Like, what if somebody needs me? What if something's happening at work? There's a crisis, whatever. But then that starts to float away. I kind of let those thoughts kind of float away, and I just enjoy being disconnected from it all and how good I feel after that. To me, that's really strong evidence that we need that as people, and we just don't get it.
It's very, very true. Because the places where you are not connected become less and less, but they do exist. And when you're forced to be kind of cut off from that, yeah, it's a little anxiety producing to start, but it's amazing how quickly that shifts into like, wow, why am I not doing this more often? Just disconnecting from the noise. Let's talk about how this impacts an individual. So we know that there are the internal and external culture and systems that are overextending us. How do you see that impacting the individual?
Yeah, I think there are a variety of ways that we see it. And I think about, we had a Be Well podcast I did on imposter syndrome. And I think, it kind of feeds into that narrative for folks sometimes, that if I'm, it's just further evidence I'm a fraud if I need this. And that leads to depression, anxiety, a lot of kind of mental health concerns. I've worked with people where they've worked 12-hour days a week for years on end, and eventually their brains just shut down. Like, they can't remember things anymore. Like, it's just like their mind has gone blank. Their brain has said, you haven't stopped this, so I'm going to stop it for you. And I think in really extreme cases, like you see that happen when people don't address this. And then I think, and as a kind of a health coach, you see the physical pieces of this a lot as well. I think about hypertension, the impact of stress eating on folks' health and well-being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the effects of chronic stress, the stress mechanism, the hormones, the effects that it has on blood pressure, diabetes and blood sugar management. And then you add on to it when we are so focused on being productive, we really are eliminating our self-care or greatly limiting our self-care. And yeah, that you can see that breakdown physically, and as you mentioned, as well as mentally.
Yeah. The other place I think about is sleep. And when you don't have a clear separation between work and home, and you kind of let yourself work later and later into the evening, you're on your electronic devices later and later in the evening. And we have so many people at Crossover who struggle with insomnia. And this is a huge factor that's contributing to that. And sleep has huge impacts on mental and physical health as well when we're not getting enough.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And then again, another vicious cycle. So when you're not sleeping, now you don't have the resources to face yet another day of being on all the time and the stress that brings. So now you have this cycle where you're really, kind of running on empty, and people run on empty for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm.
And when you run on empty, you're less productive at work, you're less focused, and it just keeps building. Yeah.
So let's see if we can turn this frown upside down.
Uh-huh.
What can people do? What can we do about it? Because it seems like it's such a huge, insurmountable issue, but what are some things that people can start doing to reverse the cycle, to address this culture of stress we're living in?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there are a lot of things people can do. And there are a lot of things that I suggest to people who are kind of dealing with these. I think one, having some kind of a mindfulness practice, even if it's a few minutes a day, is really helpful. Taking those breaks during the day, and I think with many of the folks I work with, if they don't schedule them in, they're not going to happen. And so I was talking about schedule in your self-care so that it's an appointment. It's something just like anything else, that this is something I'm expected to be at, and I'm going to do that. So I think that can be really helpful. I talk a lot about values in my clinical work, and thinking about what really is important to you. And if it is achievement and kind of career, rising up the career ladder, that's fine. Just have that inform your decision making. If your health and well-being is a more important value than that, if connection with family and relationships is more important than that, are your decisions lining up? And do you maybe want to say, I'm okay being a good enough employee so that I can be a really great partner or be a really great parent? Like, it's hard to do that all. And yeah.
I once heard that stress is when your actions do not align with your values. And I think there's definitely some truth in that. As you said, if you want to be a great partner, a great parent, whatever, and so much of your time is not really dedicated to that value, yeah, that can cause a great amount of distress, because it's not really aligning with like what's at your core. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I do hear that from people I work with, where it's like, hey, what's actually where I get filled up is my family, and work is pulling me away from that. And so then you have to think about, like, how does that inform your decision making moving forward, and really be thinking about that. And all values come with suffering attached to them, pain. It's that, when you're choosing to really care about one thing, it's going to come at some detriment to something else. And we have to kind of pick and choose. That's just the reality of being human.
It is. So what I'm hearing from you is that really being truthful with yourself about your values, or evaluating that, because maybe you sort of know, but you haven't like really thought about it. Think about what your values are, and how is where you're spending the majority of your time and energy, and I would even say maybe money, like, is that aligning with your values? So it's a good conversation for someone to have with themselves, or if you need help with that, seeing a coach or a mental health provider who can help you have that conversation. But also a more tactical part is starting a mindfulness practice. And you're going to read a lot on the Be Well page about ways you can do that. And I'm here to tell you, it's just not all about sitting in silent meditation. There's so many ways to bring mindfulness into your life. So check out our resources on that, because there's a way more ways to be mindful than just sitting in meditation.
I think it's such an important point, Danielle. And when I introduce mindfulness to people, I always help, just because I was initially really rejecting of it. Like just a person who tends to kind of be busy and active, and it felt like I wasn't doing anything, and it was just really hard to get into it. And part of what helped me is understanding initially that there were other ways of doing it. There are different entry points to being mindful, and sometimes that's a better starting place than sitting and focusing on your breath and doing that. I've gotten to a place where I can do that and really see the benefit in that as well. But it was hard initially.
Yeah. And there are, and people, there's going to be people who gravitate towards meditation, and it's great. For me personally, that was never my jam. I can't be left alone with my thoughts for that long. So for me, active forms of mindfulness sort of worked better as a sewist. For me, that's very mindful, because I need to be present so that I'm not sewing a sleeve on wrong, or which has happened. But to me, that's a mindfulness, right? So I can bring that into something that I really enjoy doing, but that is active. It's not just me sitting in silence. So the point is, folks, mindfulness can look all different ways. And if you have it in your mind that it's like this one certain thing, be prepared to be amazed, because it is more than that.
Very well put, Danielle. Absolutely.
So we've got mindfulness, we've got getting in touch with our values. Any other thing and suggestions that you would give folks for how to break the culture of stress?
Yeah, I think, and we talked also about scheduling in your self-care. Yeah. I think that's really important. Committing to using your PTO, setting goals with yourself, or if you have a great manager, like actually having that as a goal. Like my goal is to use my PTO. I need you to hold me accountable to this. I think that can be a really great strategy. And then I also think about, part of mindfulness, when you think of the core components, it's observing, it's doing things mindfully, so one thing at a time, and then it's doing it non-judgmentally. And I think that's often the hardest one. We're so critical of ourselves. So I think, I would really encourage people listening to this to notice your self-critical thoughts, the judgment that comes in, and not accept those as facts. Actually ask yourself, like, hey, where is this coming from? Like, is this me? Is this a cultural message that I've taken in? Is it serving me? And to really kind of think through that judgment, because I think that's often a huge barrier to people actually doing things to manage their stress.
It really, really is. That inner critic has a loud and obnoxious voice often. And if we can just be so obnoxious, if we can just be like, okay, all right, I see you. And I'm not judging the thought, but I see you. Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's be curious, right? Because I think there's a certain amount of curiosity that comes with mindfulness. I'm going to be curious about where this thought is coming from. And also, I also find sometimes if I can just say, like, thank you, inner critic. I understand at some level here you're trying to protect me. Okay. But your services aren't needed. This is not helpful. But yeah, right. Like if you can kind of look at those thoughts with curiosity and non-judgment.
And I love how you kind of talked back to your critic there, and even like some laughter. Like you think about what can disarm that, and humor, and just really kind of, that laughter is such a powerful. We didn't talk about that today. We haven't talked about that as a de-stressor, but laughter is just magical, including in response to your inner critic. because sometimes what the inner critic has to say is just ridiculous.
It's absurd. And it's amazing how long we just take that. We accept it at face value. Oh, that's legitimate. And then when you bring mindfulness to it and you step out of it and you almost look at that thought from like a third party, like, wait a minute, that's not right. That's absurd. Yeah, but it takes practice. So to your point, like starting a mindfulness practice and practicing it is super, super helpful because it's not automatic. You got to work at it.
And in fact, it's the opposite. What's automatic is that kind of thought pattern that becomes so fixed. And I always kind of liken it, when you think about your brain, they're like freeways in the brain. This isn't like, horse-drawn carriage anymore. It happens so fast that it's hard to slow down and even realize it's happening. And so it takes real work and practice to kind of rebuild the roads into something that actually works for you. It's hard.
But here's the thing, folks, I want you to just pay attention to what Michael said about rebuilding the roads, because here's the beauty of practicing mindfulness. You can rebuild the roads. Those thoughts might always on some level be automatic. That inner critic is trying to serve a purpose, but so then you might always have those thoughts. However, the more mindfulness you practice, the more you actually rebuild those pathways into something that is more constructive. So practice and repetition of mindfulness can make it easier in the long run.
It's such a great point, Danielle. And I don't think people realize this. And I have a lot of folks who are kind of engineers that I see where science is so important. They'll actually ask me the research and the neurobiology behind these things. We have functional MRIs of the brain undergoing like a mindfulness practice, and what you see at the beginning of a mindfulness practice and what you see 4 or 5 months down the road for people who've done it, the brain actually functions differently when we practice it. It's amazing. And the brain has the science term is neuroplasticity. It has the ability to rewire itself in that way if you do the things you need to do. So plenty of hope here for people to feel better.
Right. And if we can't change the system, and this probably is a conversation for a different day on systemically, how can we change the culture of stress? I mean, I think if the answer to that, we'd be getting some sort of Nobel Prize, I would hope. So we can't always control the culture that is around us. We can't always control some of these things. So what I'm hoping you all took out of today was maybe some tangible first steps on, as an individual, what you may be able to do to function better and to push back a little bit on this culture of stress that we find ourselves living in. Michael, any closing thoughts for our listeners?
I think you summed it up really well, Danielle. Whenever we do these, I just always encourage people to have an action step that comes out of it. It's easy to watch this and totally connect to it and then not do anything with it.
Right? True.
So we've given you some strategies. Commit to trying one. Just pick one. You don't need to pick all of them. That may be overwhelming. But pick one and commit to doing it. And what I always tell people is, when it's new, put it somewhere where you can see it, do a sticky note, put it on a whiteboard, put it someplace where you're reminding yourself that, hey, this is a goal I'm working on, so that you're able to hold yourself accountable to it. And if it's still hard to do that, and I think you mentioned this, Danielle, we can help it cross over. We have mental health providers, coaches who are really able to help be a guide as you develop these practices.
Yes. And, again, this isn't necessarily hardwired for you. It's quite the opposite, right? So if you need help getting into this, that is exactly what we're here for. So please take advantage of it. We would love to help you on this journey, because we want to see you living your best life and being healthy mentally and physically. And so, if you need us, please come and see us. Thank you so much for being here. This was such an awesome conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Really enjoyed it.
And for those of you listening, as always, take care and be well.